Welcome Classic Rock fans to another ranking video, worst to best so to speak, and today we're looking at the albums of Kate Bush. Interestingly, there's a quote attributed to Aristotle that says there is no great genius without some touch of madness. My word, that's certainly applicable in this case. Over the years we've been mesmerised by Kate Bush's wide-eyed and theatrical wailings as she plunges us into a world imbued with literature, folklore, myth and legend. She is undoubtedly one of the most unique voices of 20th century music, with that glass-worrying shriek of hers and those lush arrangements. Admittedly, she's not everybody's cup of home ground, so to speak, but I think she's extraordinary. So number 10 at the bottom of my list is Director's Cut from 2011. I was umming and ahhing whether to actually include this, as to my mind it's just a reworking of older material from the Red Shoes and Sensual world. Kate Bush has always said that these songs didn't conform to her original vision for them, and this gives her an opportunity to reinterpret them, her voice sounding a little bit more weathered on this album, which I rather enjoy actually. I quite like Joni Mitchell's reinterpretation of her older material. She certainly imbues these songs with a greater character, I think, which her voice now inhabits beautifully, I have to say. There's no doubt that this is an intriguing album, but it's just a reworking of older material. Number 9 is The Red Shoes from 1993. This is the first album where Kate Bush didn't actually appear on the front cover and would be her last for 12 years. The title, of course, was inspired by the 1948 Pressburger and Powell film. And my word, those guys have made some impressive movies in their day, from The Matter of Life and Death with David Niven to the wonderful Black Narcissus with Deborah Kerr, if I'm not mistaken. But they, in turn, were inspired by the Hans Christian Andersen story about a dancer who's possessed by her art and can't take off her shoes and find peace. Maybe Kate Bush is telling us something here. For this record, she was aiming for a live feel. In fact, Del Palmer said in an interview that the intention was to record it quickly so they could take it out on the road. The album has a lot of high-profile cameo appearances from the likes of, I think, Prince, Jeff Beck, Gary Brooker, Eric Clapton, to name but a few. And in many ways, I feel that it gives it a very eclectic mix and range of musical textures, which don't always work for me, to be honest with you. I love the track Eat the Music with its blend of calypso and Caribbean sounds, as well as the melding of ideas of sexuality and romance with some rather earthy, food-based metaphors. The style of production on this album is grander and louder and interspersed with a whole range of different instrumentation. My word, it's a far cry from those soft, delicate pastoral tones of the sensual world. Rubber Band Girl was a single of this record. It embraces a simplicity in terms of its songwriting style and construction. Very happy-go-lucky theme to it as well, although Kate Bush wasn't particularly happy with this song. In fact, she thought about leaving it off the album. An album that, for me, feels a tad rushed, to be honest with you. You're the One is an interesting number due to those very Procol Harum-esque organ sound brought to the mix by Gary Brooker, and it ends with that wonderful guitar section by Jeff Beck. Number 8 is A Sensual World from 1989. After the huge success of 1985's Hounds of Love, she returns 4 years later with this album. It lacks the rage and indignation of The Dreaming and the contextual fog of Hounds of Love, but nevertheless it is imbued with a appreciation of the universe and what one critic has described as a feminine spirit. Kate Bush has said this is her happiest album. In an interview I think she did for Q Magazine, she described this as 10 little stories. And she's right, these songs represent these mini narratives that ooze their own sense of character and identity. She declared that she was always searching for a sense of peace, and this atmosphere very much envelops all the songs on this album. The title track is an intriguing one, inspired by Ulysses by James Joyce, specifically the passage where Molly Bloom recounts her first sexual experience with her husband Leopold. In this track, she steps out of the book into the real world. We get to juxtapose one sensual world for another. I must admit I love the Blakean illusion, and my arrows of desire rewrite the speech. Wonderful line. The fog is gorgeous and provides us with an effective metaphor for growing and independence. Kate Bush said, I'm not sure any of us really grow up properly. The idea of letting go is poignant here, and we get this image of the father teaching their children to swim, moving himself further and further back and asking them to swim to him. Therefore, the swimming becomes an analogy for growing and independence. It's a bit like that C.D. Lewis poem, Walking Away. And Michael Nyman's strings here allow for the exquisite and melodic reaching out to do just that, reach out really. And of course David Gilmour's guitar work on Love and Anger is particularly interesting. Deeper understanding is, I think, about people immersed in new technologies to the extent and detriment of genuine human relations. My word, what a foreshadowing that was. And Rocket's Tale, there's a pun there on tail, as it's a song inspired by her cat. Very much like Queen's Delilah. In fact, my word, all these singers gone all T.S. Eliot on us. This woman's work is such a delicate and beautiful number, which is actually written for the film She's Having a Baby, which came out the previous year. This album is about standing still. It's an exhalation, taking a deep breath and just appreciating the moment, a moment lived in the sensual world. Number 7 is 50 Words for Snow from 2011. This is a beautiful and sombre sounding album, 7 tracks of sung and spoken word, spread across gorgeous ambient soundscapes to a backdrop of falling snow. Of course, the title track is based upon the idea that Eskimos actually have 50 words for snow. Feeling rather waggish, I would say, well, they probably would have to, otherwise I Spy would be really shit, wouldn't it? Each track is built around a very subdued voice, I think, and these very jazz-tinged piano pieces, almost like an exhalation, really, unfurling on the frosty air of these ambient soundscapes. Each track is given the space to breathe and reveal itself to the listener. This album engages in the myth and fantasy of the natural world, begins with Snowflake, a fascinating piece that is delicate and soft, how appropriate you might say, with the vocals from my son Bertie. It traces this narrative arc as this snowflake drifts from the heavens to a human hand, and you get this shimmering crystalline piano which occupies the lower middle register, in the words of one critic, creating an intriguing harmonic pattern. And it holds the narrative so well as this snowflake is given voice before melting into the consciousness of the natural world itself. Snowed In at Wheeler Street is a duo with Elton John, delivering a compelling tale of would-be lovers encountering one another in various reincarnations across time. It's a gorgeous tale, made even more dramatic, I think, by the drumming work of Steve Gadd. Now, Steve Gadd improves every song he plays on simply by virtue of just playing on it. The title track is a strange, eclectic mix of all these loops and interesting bass and rhythms. And this is where we get the very distinguishable, plummy voice of Stephen Fry recounting the 50 Words for Snow. One critic has described this as coming across as more like a thespian's parlour game than a song. And Misty, which is the longest track on the album, if I'm not mistaken, tells the tale of a young girl who builds a snowman who subsequently comes to life, and they share an impassioned night together, ultimately resulting in inevitably damp sheets. I think Raymond Briggs missed a trick with this one. And Wildman, which has the abominable snowman at the heart of it, and those wonderful vocals by Andy Fairweather-Lowe, who voices the Nepalese mountain dweller. One reviewer has called the duo of Elton John and Stephen Fry as two duff notes on an otherwise impeccable album. He goes on to say that the voices are too meaty and familiar to be free to float in Bush's ethereal snow globe world. I happen to agree, actually. I think it would have been better to use an unfamiliar voice or unknown voice actor for these parts, rather than distract us from the magic and the moment of these pieces by the associations that these well-known voices actually have. Number 6 is The Kick Inside from 1978. This is an album that draws upon all those early demos. Demos that were actually paid for by David Gilmour. And it has, it's unabashedly romantic and impressionable, and these songs have an energy and naivety to them, which is part of their charm. It's ethereal and beguiling. However, these songs do come across as a little bit raw. I think, with not a lot of thought put into the actual sequencing of the track. Kate Bush became an absolute master at this sort of thing later on. But even during this album, her producer at the time, John Kelly, said he was very impressed with how self-assured and professional she was despite her young age. This is a precocious album, unsettlingly so, with themes encompassing everything from literary works to incest to Russian mystics. Something for everybody on this record. And she's an enigma. She didn't engage with that throwaway pop nor the bumptious nihilism of punk that was pogoing its way across the British Isles at this point. Instead, her work is an embodiment of a more poignant statement on the liberating power of the imagination and art. And she certainly made an impression at EMI as she was asked to support Fleetwood Mac on their Rumours tour. Was it the Tusk tour? I can't remember. But certainly to support Fleetwood Mac, which she wisely declined. The core of the studio band for this album was not the band of Kate Bush's choosing, but one that was imposed upon her by EMI. And they consisted of, from Pilot, Ian Bearson and David Patton, and from Cockney Rebel, Duncan McKay and Stuart Elliott. Nevertheless, I love the sound of this band. I particularly like Elliott's very languid drumming on Moving. Moving, of course, was a track dedicated to Lindsay Kemp. Lindsay Kemp, of course, was a choreographer who'd taught Kate Bush dance and mime and things like that, and she wanted to do something that encompasses his grace, I think. Also melding it with the image of whales, who she also saw as incredibly graceful and balletic and blubbery creatures. The track actually begins and ends with Whale Call, which was taken from recordings made by Dr. Roger S. Payne, which I believe was made public in 1970. The Man with the Child in His Eyes was, according to Kate Bush, it was written, actually I think this was written when she was about 13. I mean, my God, that's scary to begin with. But I think she said it was about the fact that she ultimately believed that men were little boys at heart and that their partners were drawn to them because they recognised something with their father in them. This is encouraging us to dip our toes into some pretty murky pools. And it has, of course, been covered by Natalie Cole and Dusty Springfield. Wuthering Heights was an interesting song that came to her while she was sitting at an upright piano gazing at the moon from an open window after watching the 1967 version of the BBC dramatisation of Wuthering Heights. In this song she captures the untamed energy, I think, of Emily Bronte, with whom she actually shares a birthday. There you go, one of life's strange phenomena. Kate Bush said of the vocals that Kathy was a spirit, and the only way to evoke or communicate that was through a very high register. This gothic romance distilled into 4.5 minutes is a gorgeous rhapsody. Don't take my word for it, I'm actually quoting Simon Reynolds. But even John Lydon described this song as beauty beyond belief. Nevertheless, her glass worrying register wasn't everyone's cup of tea. Even John Peel turned around and said, I can't take her seriously because of that voice. Plans were afoot for a November release, but that was delayed by Kate Bush's objection to the cover, the single cover, which she insisted that EMI change. But EMI, all credit where credit's due, had decided to delay the release anyway, feeling that it would just get lost amid all the tinsel and pageantry of the Christmas festive season, and waited till January to put it out there. And they were quite right as well, because Wings' Mull of Kintyre was bagpiping its way into the public consciousness for about 9 weeks. Interestingly, the Bronte Society at this point called this song a disgrace, and that it cheapened a valuable literary work. I think the irony here is that Emily Bronte would have got this song. She would have enjoyed the creative impulse behind it, whereas the fusty old Bronte Society did not. They did change their tune, though, about 40 years later when they erected a monument to the Bronte sisters on the Yorkshire moors. Kate Bush was encouraged to contribute something. James and the Coal Gun is a song that intrigues me off this record. It's a song that's faded out, unfortunately, due to the limitations of vinyl, but I'm presuming there's a full-length version of this in the can somewhere, which may well see the light of day. The reason I love this song so much is, as a boy, my obsession with westerns, and I just assumed that the song was about the James Gang. Kate Bush has gone on record to say it's not actually about anyone in particular. Although one thing for sure is the line, Jenny is waiting on her big brass bed, is a line that's stolen straight from Bob Dylan's Lay Lady Lay. And we get the title track, for which I've done a classic song review. I'll try and put a card up there if you want to check that out. A song that deals with an old incest murder ballad melded with Greek mythology. This is a truly marvellous work and a remarkable debut album. Number 5 is Lionheart from 1978. This was an album that was somewhat rushed, really, to capitalise on the momentum of the success of the debut album. Kate Bush has said as much herself. Nevertheless, I feel that the material on this album is better sequenced and warmer, I think, than the debut. And that warmth is perfectly reflected in the browns and amber of the record sleeve. But I love the way this album generally deals with childhood and myth and those sort of influences. I particularly like In Search of Peter Pan. I love the tinkling piano, which sounds like a child's musical box. Of course, she's using the J.M. Barrie novel here as a vehicle for her own tract on a childhood. But it exquisitely encapsulates that sense of childlike wonder. But it also, at the very end, uses When You Wish Upon a Star, written by Lee Harline and Ed Washington, which was used in the 1940 Walt Disney film Pinocchio. Symphony in Blue is another wonderful one, inspired by Peter Reich's Book of Dreams. I think Cloud Busting also claims that as well. But it's also a tribute to the music of Eric Satie's Gymnopadis, which is also interesting. The album, like her first, focuses, I think, very much on dance and theatre. I think her later works draw in a more filmic and cinematic aesthetic. Wow, of course, which is her take on fame and the music business. She said she wanted to make a record like Pink Floyd, something spacey, she said. Melody Maker called this the most precisely focused Kate Bush single since Wuthering Heights. Not everyone was enamoured with it, though. Sounds went on to describe it as an effort from a mediocre chanteuse crooning her way through this silly song. Don't Push Your Foot on the Heartbreaker apparently is a homage to Patti Smith. I love the line in this song, don't put your blues where your shoes should be. Then we get the lush Oh England My Lionheart. How Rupert Brooke of her. An unashamed paean to nostalgia, I think. Kate Bush has described this as a poetical play on the romantic visuals of England. It has a whiff of Renaissance music to it and evokes that charming sense of identity. And Hammer Horror, of course, was a dramatic number, a very melodramatic number, with the introduction almost reminiscent of ELO, I would say. But it was rather than inspired by the Hammer movies that I used to watch as a child. Apparently it was actually inspired by her watching James Cagney playing the part of Lon Chaney. This is a remarkable album, which many feel is somewhat less than the debut. I thoroughly disagree with that. However, EMI this wasn't released in the United States until 1984. Number 4 is Ariel from 2005. This is her first album since 1993's The Red Shoes. On this record, she beautifully communicates these lushly romantic depictions of things mundane and cosmic in equal measure, forcing us to recognise the beauty in the minutiae of a day. And the cover uses an image emblematic of what this album is about. Essentially about sea, sky and twittery things. The image on the front is actually a waveform of a blackbird song superimposed over this glorious golden sunset. Musically, it's an eclectic album and embodies elements of folk, classical, Renaissance music, even flamenco and rock. The side 1 is a collection of unrelated songs, and side 2 is this conceptual piece about the development of a day. Of course, side 1 features the wonderful King of the Mountain, her meditation on fame and isolation. The premise is, of course, that Elvis Presley is alive and well and living on a mountaintop somewhere. She also references Citizen Kane, the Orson Welles film in this. A film about, again, about isolation, I think, or loneliness, about a newspaper magnate, loosely based on William Randolph Hearst. It's at this point we should segue into a close-up and I'll whisper Rosebud at you. And King of the Mountain, I love the bit where she sings it with a very Presley-like drawl. I thought it was quite a nice touch. Elvis, Are You Out There Somewhere, she sings Looking Like a Happy Man. And this number is imbued with these very ghostly synths and this chorus of wind that the song is built upon, and interesting drumming at the very end. The B-side of this was actually a song that she recorded, I think, about 12 years previous, and that was her version of Marvin Gaye's Sexual Healing. I love the song Bertie, this beautiful madrigal of unashamed maternal devotion to her son, perhaps reminiscent of Lennon's Beautiful Boy. Here comes the sunshine, here comes that son of mine, she sings. The pun reminding us of that rather caustic quip that Hamlet makes to his uncle Claudius, "Not so, my lord, I am too much in the sun." It's a Renaissance-style ode, actually performed on period instruments. Then we get Sky of Honey, this suite of songs that takes the listener through a day's journey into night and the unfolding of a summer sky. In fact, John van der Kiest says this is the music of pagan rapture, consisting of songs about the act of creation. It certainly has a cyclical structure, which is no doubt as it should be, as the day unfolds and then closes in on itself. The poet Philip Larkin said, "Days are where we live," and this song is an exquisite canvas that communicates just that. Number 3 is Hounds of Love from 1985. For many, this is her strongest album, and understandably so. It also marked her breakthrough into the American charts. For this record, she wanted to craft a song that was in part a pop album. It bears some similarities, I think, to Peter Gabriel's So in that respect. It abounds with appealing arrangements and melodic hooks, reflecting idioms ranging from orchestrated progressive pop to art rock. Her vocal performance is incredible. It's incredibly expressive and confessional. In fact, one critic said it's almost like we're eavesdropping when we listen to this album. The launch party for this album was actually at the London Planetarium, like Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon. And guests were treated to a playback and a laser show as the album played out. Running Up a Hill, A Deal with God got to number 3 in the UK charts and is now enjoying renewed success, much thanks to the Netflix series Stranger Things. But it's a track that's very much defined by that Fairlight drone and those electronic drums beating out a tattoo, as well as her more sober performance, I suppose. In fact, one critic has said that gone was the wide-eyed, shrill voice ingenue of Wuthering Heights. Now, with a deeper, richer voice, her movements are more controlled and self-possessed. This song was actually going to be called Deal with God, and she was advised by EMI not to include God in the title. Seriously, it sounds obvious, really. I mean, what band would include God in a song title? God only knows. The track was used as the main theme tune for 1986's children's drama series Running Scared, and the soundtrack of the film The Chocolate War, which was from 1988, I believe. And the B-side to this was Under the Ivy, one of the most beautiful songs she's ever written, in my opinion. The title track starts with the words, "It's in the trees, it's coming." This is actually sampled from the British film, 1957 British film Night of the Demon, and the actor is Maurice Denham. The idea of people wanting to run away from love and not let it catch them, beautifully served in the metaphor of the hounds chasing them, the hounds of love, threatening to rip them to shreds if it ever gets them. The video was actually directed by Kate Bush herself and is based on Hitchcock's 39 Steps. Side 2 is The Ninth Wave, the track about the young girl in the sea, overnight desperately trying not to fall asleep. It's a sidelong conceptual piece. The track has often been read as an extended metaphor, if you like, for endurance and for the importance of the living moment. One critic has said that this song is inspired by her fear of drowning under the weight of her colossal ambition. It sounds like a lot of tosh to me. Graham Thompson saw it as a story about not dying, not going under, but instead riding the waves and somehow keeping going. It kind of makes more sense, I think. And every moment of darkness in this track is counteracted with a kind of ringing affirmation. You have to admit this is a beautifully crafted and balanced album. The first track in this conceptual piece is her struggle to stay awake. Let me be weak and let me sleep and dream of sheep. The next bit actually included her own mother's voice. Under the Ice deals with memories of the past and visions of the immediate future, and including the nightmare of being alone under a frozen or on a frozen lake, and Waking the Witch has something of the medieval show trials to it. The sound of the helicopter in this was actually borrowed from Pink Floyd's The Happiest Days of Our Lives. And in this track she experiences a whole range of different emotions before the morning fog is dispelled and we get her rescue. Overall, it's easy to see why this album is considered her best. I much prefer the conceptual darkness of side 2 over side 1, to be honest with you. I'm rather tired of listening to some of the songs on side 1. Although I have to say my favourite track on the opening side of this album is Mother Stands for Comfort. Number 2 is Never Forever from 1980. This is a sublime album. It's a transitional album as well. It's one which sees her moving away from traditional song structures to more avant-garde, arty, conceptual pieces. It's an album that's somewhat marred, I feel, by the fact that she dusts off some older songs from her catalogue for inclusion. Songs that would be better suited to the aesthetic of the Lionheart album, perhaps. Songs like Violin and Wedding List and perhaps Egypt. But the full scope of her ambition in terms of its textures and atmospheres are apparent in the first 4 tracks of the album. Don't get me wrong, Violin, Wedding List, songs like that are wonderful, but I think better suited to a slightly earlier period. And this album opens up with Babushka, that intriguing narrative of where a woman chooses to test her husband's fidelity by assuming this alter ego. It also came attendant with a promotional video which has kept schoolboys happy for many a generation. Interestingly, Kate Bush said she never realised that this was the Russian word for grandmother, assuming that the name just came from some sort of old fairy tale. I think perhaps she had in mind the old Slavic fairy tale, Baba Yaga or Baba Yaga, an ogress who steals, cooks and eats children. Incidentally, the Russian word for grandmother is babushka. The stress is on the first syllable rather than babushka. And the excellent cover, of course, designed by Nick Price, shows a drawing of Kate Bush, all these animals and little beasties flowing from beneath her skirts. Kate Bush has said it's a visual metaphor, really. It demonstrates that we all have good and bad within us. Delius is one of my favourite songs on this album. It takes its title, Song of Summer, from the Ken Russell documentary, and obviously taps into Kate Bush's fascination with Frederick Delius. It depicts him as an elderly man sat in his wheelchair, while a water nymph or fairy dances around on the water. It's beautifully enigmatic. Blow Away for Bill is a tribute to Bill Duffield, her lighting director, on her rather ironically titled A Tour of Life, who met with a tragic accident. I think he fell. So obviously she paid tribute to him here, but also she lists other luminaries who have kind of shuffled off way too early. People like Keith Moon and Sid Vicious and Sandy Denny and Mark Bolan, for example. It's a song that very much challenges our fear of death. Kate Bush said in an interview, it's the ultimate unknown. It's at the same time, it's our ultimate purpose. It's what we're here for. We're really transient. The use of strings in the Fairlight CMI add to a very whimsical atmosphere on this album, a very ethereal quality, and that certainly is carried over in the song All We Ever Looked For, which seems to be about a quest or a desire for understanding or meaning. If we think about the songs on side 2, of course, we get The Wedding List, which is inspired by Francois Truffaut's 1968 film The Bride That Wore Black, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think goes on to also inform Tarantino's Kill Bill. That's it, Kill Bill. And we get the song Violin with vocal shrieks and gymnastics, which is obviously supposed to represent the sound of a violin, but also perhaps as a slight nod to Susie Sue and Lena Lovitch, perhaps. Infant Kiss is drawn from the 1961 Gothic horror film called The Innocents, which in itself is based on the Henry James novel Turn of the Screw. Army Dreamers is just exquisitely beautiful. The sublime track is one of the standout numbers on this album, without a doubt. And then we get to Breathing. Breathing, I feel, feels somewhat dated now. It's all part of that nuclear paranoia that gripped the early 80s, I think. But it's a remarkable narrative, this tale of this child in utero in fear of this cataclysmic event. She said it was inspired by Pink Floyd. She went on to say there's always something very atomic about Floyd's music. And interestingly, of course, Roy Harper guests on this as a vocalist. Go figure, eh? Number 1 is The Dreaming from 1982. This is her most abstract and arty work. Many have argued that it's just a little bit too indigestible, but this is the first time she seizes control of her sound production and mix, incorporating all sorts of studio gadgetry, all used to emphasize her artistic range, romanticism, and the inquisitive nature of her artistic vision. Admittedly, this album is not as accessible as some of her other works, but it's a beguiling and haunting work nonetheless. And its genius lies in its production. It's the layering of light and shade rather than being full band performances. It's a kind of Kate collage, if you will. She said that in order to write something that has meaning, there has to be some kind of torment. And one of the central themes of this record is this the unknowability of the universe and the frustration, the existential frustration of that, beautifully apparent in the single Sat in Your Lap, where she this quest for knowledge which is never satisfied. She said you climb over one wall only to find there's a bigger wall waiting for you. She said she wanted elements of this song to sound as if she was singing it from the rooftop. For this one, she becomes the archetypal fool on the hill as she rages and froths. Interestingly, the B-side to this song was a cover version of Donovan's Lord of Reedy River. Leave It Open is goth-like and full of brooding. In fact, one critic has said that it displays a suspending scale of vocalic laments, but it's the vivacious and turbulent Get Out of My House which grabs my interest, a song inspired by Stephen King's Shining. Many have dubbed this as her She's Gone Mad album, and understandably so. It's incredibly experimental. She also uses a range of musicians on this album, which all add to the different textures and feel that this record has. People like members of the Chieftains and Planxty, Rolf Harris, Jimmy Bain, I think, from Rainbow, as well as Jeff Downes. This was also her first album to be an entirely blank canvas. There were no songs used on here that were written pre-1978. There Goes a Tenor is fascinating. There were some beautiful, haunting, Kate-like passages here, as well as her rather amusing Mockney accent. It's about a botched bank job, and it's a tribute to those wonderful old Ealing comedies. Pull Out the Pin was inspired by a documentary she saw on the Vietnam War, where the North Vietnamese, before going into action, they used to pop a little Buddha on their tongue, so they would die with Buddha on their lips. This is one of the best songs on this album, in my opinion. Suspended in Gaffer, with an interesting video of her prancing about in a barn, all about this quest for personal fulfillment, and it also features a cameo from her mother. The cover photo, of course, is an illustration which accompanies the song Houdini, where his wife would transfer this key with a sneaky little kiss. Before recording Houdini, according to John van der Kiest in his book, she drank a pint of milk so she'd get enough phlegm to give her voice that tormented and gravelly quality. And I think the tape is also sped up, so it gives her voice more weight. It sounds darker and more troubled. And then the album's title track addresses certain political and ecological themes, guest starring Rolf Harris, who she brought in with his didgeridoo. She described the sound of his playing as like a swarm of tiny velvet bees dancing around my ear. The original title for this song was the Abo Song, which wouldn't have gone down well then, and certainly not now. Also, the rhythmic breathing and drum sound on this was sampled by Depeche Mode for their song Personal Jesus. So this is number 1 for me. It's a brilliant and experimental work of genius as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, so that's my ranking of the Kate Bush albums. I mean, they're all wonderful albums, let's make no bones about it. But this is the order in which I would prefer to listen to them. I'd urge you to click like, subscribe, and check that bell if you've enjoyed this content, and check below this video for the links for ways you can support the sterling work done here at Classic Album Review. Other than that, I'll leave you with my closing salvo, which is, as always, hope you're staying well and healthy, but more importantly, of course, is that you'll keep listening.